Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool. Congrats.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm very stoked, actually.
All right, guys. Let me share my screen with you. Get us rolling. At this point, you guys should be able to see my screen, yeah?
Yes, sir.
All right. Cool. So, a favorite topic, and probably pretty timely for you, Megan, talking about tapering. And
What's that?
Yeah. And I think probably both of you recognize that, that's kind of a misnomer when you're working with me. Tapering is basically a sharpening up, but really there probably should be a better word for it. I really like the fact that when athletes come into shape, they really have to go pretty hard right up to the race day. But it depends on who you are and how you proceed in terms of tapering. And tapering, fortunately, you guys don't have to do too much thinking on it just yet, but you will have to help your athletes troubleshoot. And what I mean by not thinking is you'll be able to apply, obviously the TriStar plans that we have, but you are going to need to know how to navigate for some of these folks. And I'm going to give you a couple different scenarios of things that have happened in the past for me as a coach throughout the years to get you guys to think about, what to do. So what is tapering? Tapering is kind of, they call it art and science of bringing the athlete into peak form. And the goal should be towards moving towards more freshness and slowly shedding fatigue without giving back too much of your hard work. And a lot of athletes will, self-coached athletes in particular, will taper so much so that they will lose even a whole month's worth of fitness that they've put into their training. And lo and behold, they're not nearly as fit as they could have been on race day. So the goal is, like I said, to arrive in the best form, in the peak shape. And we're also going to talk about the different levels of races. So you've got A priority races, B priority races, C priority races, and even D, and how you kind of taper and think about those. So how do we accomplish tapering? We use the performance management chart. That provides the bedrock. There will be some finagling in the art that I'll call moving certain sessions around to make it work for each individual athlete, but ultimately, as long as your athletes can commit to getting their information and their data to you, the performance management chart is going to accomplish this for you guys. So that's, I've left a link here for you guys to see just some information, that's general information on the performance management chart if you want to review that a little bit. But the next piece to this is charting your athletes' training stress balance. So training stress balance, right, we know has to be in a positive zone on race day. And similarly, we have to really watch it in the final 3 weeks as we lead into a taper, especially towards an A priority event. And we have to watch that the athlete doesn't try and do some sort of mega distance training, some special really hard one singular session that knocks them out and they're no longer in peak form. So the goal is to really feel completely jumping out of your skin good, close to a race. So you've got A priority races, B priority races, C priority races, and their subsequent tapers. So it's all a question of how fresh do you want to be and how much fitness do you want to give up to be that fresh? That's really what it comes down to, is how much fitness are you willing to sacrifice and future potential in order to race at your best? So that is kind of the theory on it. C priority races. These are really less important races, but they're important but less important in terms of the athlete's performance. So, this may be when an athlete is not as in good of shape. Example, somebody's racing in the base period or coming off a reduced volume. And I don't want to, backhand them and say that C priority races aren't important, because they in fact are. But C priority races really are used to create general check-ins towards where you're at, and they're used towards future periods of builds. And so we don't want to say that they're not important, because they are. And in fact, it's very hard for you as a coach to give the types of training that someone can accomplish in a race. For example, if I said, Kyle, hey, I want you to go and do, a 70.3 swim and a 56-mile bike and a half marathon as hard as you can, you get pretty cross at me if you just went and did it solo a couple times in a weekend or every other weekend. So the really races provide this opportunity where the athlete can put themselves out there and be in a race format. So as far as C priority races go, it's a marginal 1 to 2 day taper. That's all that's necessary. And you and your athlete need to discuss the expectations. And this race is also called and often called a train through quote race. So that means you're really training through it. It's kind of like, a very soft taper, and you're just going to go and race with quite some fatigue on it so that your CTL doesn't drop and you're continuing to train through it. So C tapers allow you to keep the most fitness, but at the expense of being very fresh. So for longer term goals, it's important to not taper as much or as often. And this is especially critical for long course triathletes, as they really have to get that fitness value up. They have to really ramp up this CTL here and not give back very much. If you're not nearly as worried and you're as fit for fitness and you're looking more for, durability and experience in racing, then it doesn't matter. You can do a full-blown taper. So if you have a short course athlete that's really doing more sprints or they're intermediate and their Olympic distance, you may find that you can do a full-blown taper for them. But we'll really even call that more so B priority race. So for now, C tapers are really soft tapers. All races are level in terms of output. However, whether or not you get the A versus C performance depends on your taper, fitness, and the athlete's race specificity. So every athlete's going to give it their all when they go out there. We know that. But whether or not they're able to fulfill their goals, hit their time goals, or be in the best shape of their life is a completely different story. So that's up to you to help them figure out how to get there and how to be in that peak shape. And that's pretty much C priority races. D priority races are even less than that. They're ones that we actually don't even taper for. You just kind of use them as training. And I didn't put it on here as a topic in particular, but it is just so you know, it's just that less of a factor in terms of how you taper for them. Any questions on C priority races, guys?
Would you say that those are races where you're still trying to build fitness versus use your fitness?
So C priority races, they accomplish a couple different things. Number one, they get you battle testedness. They get you fitness that can't be generated in just day-to-day training. So it's very hard to send an athlete, like I said, to go and do their own self-race every weekend. And so it's your opportunity to check in with them and see where they're at, and also move the dial up a little bit. Oftentimes, a C priority race or a B priority race is going to give you a very high intensity factor, and probably one of their highest intensity factors already for the season, over distance. So intensity over distance is a huge thing to get from an athlete, and motivation drives that. High revving athletes don't have a problem with that. Like your top level athletes are not going to struggle with that. But your beginner athletes will really have a hard time staying focused, being in that 80%, 90% for extended periods of time for any distance. Yeah. Make sense, Kyle?
It does, yep.
Cool. Good question. All right. All right, so moving on to the B priority races. These B priority races, the tapers are similar to the C with a few, oops, a little bit of squeaking. You still there, Megan?
Yep, sorry.
Okay. So B priority races, they're similar to C with a few changes. So you may taper 3 to 7 days out. So with C priority races, we were less than that. We were really just 1 to 2 days out. And it depends on the discussion with your athlete on to how key the event is for them and the point they are in their season. So your athlete may have more interest in their total performance and output, so that qualifies it more so as a B priority race. And it puts more race demands on the athlete towards their eventual, quote, A race. So oftentimes I'll place a B race as a lead-in to an A priority race, and that's generally 6 to 8 weeks out from an A priority race, though they can be as far out as 15 weeks, depending upon who your athlete is. So it's usually timed, as I said, closer to the A priority race, and this is an even better event that you're going to diagnostically check in. You're going to find out how close are we racing to their FTP, what was their total output, were they able to manage the pacing strategy that you gave them, really much closer to the eventual A priority race. You may even ask the athlete to find a race that's similar to the event that they're going to be doing. Now, B priority races are used to generate fitness and intensity, so the taper is a little bit more critical than the C priority races, however, not full-blown like the A priority, and that's generally splitting the difference between the two, fitness and freshness, in order to have the highest output on race day. So, you may find some of your athletes do really well in the B priority races because even a soft taper for a lot of athletes is generally going to do really well for them. And so B priority races, a lot of them will fall into that bucket, and C priority races are more infrequent, and A priority races are even less frequent. So what is the A priority race? Well, that is the peak race in terms of your event and what you're really trying to get your athlete to be maxed out for. There's usually only 1 to 2 races like this in a season, and really higher level athletes may have many Bs, as I mentioned, but only 1 or 2 A priority races. So you're going to march this CTL up, and you're going to find that your A priority race should hit somewhere, in this peak form at the top of your season, that you're generally only holding for about 6 to 8 weeks. Some, more beginner athletes may only be 4 weeks, 3 weeks. And the longest I've ever seen that extended is like 9 or 10 weeks. So to peak, the taper must be more complete. So you really have to freshen up. And this means, tapering a minimum of 10 days out and up to 14 days. And the types of sessions can vary greatly depending upon the different athlete levels. So that's inherent in the plans that we put together at TriStar. And tapering for A races, it still all depends upon the peak levels of training that you were achieving. And it'll be your job as the coach to make sure that the training stress balance is appropriate for the weeks leading into the event. So oftentimes when an athlete is tapering into an event, I'm going to go backwards and make sure that their training stress balance checks out. So if we go into, I'm going to pull up an athlete who's tapering here for Arizona.
Phew, I got nervous there for a minute.
Welcome back. Hey, you thought it was going to be you, Megan?
I was a little nervous there for a second.
All right, so this is a good example of an athlete here coming into their peak form. And so I'm monitoring each day kind of what the training stress balance here is looking like, and more so even at the end of the week. And let's say I'm going to go into their calendar view. And what you'll see is we're at Wednesday. And we're now a week and a half out, and he's doing Arizona. And notice that his form, he's starting to come up for air. He's at +6 training stress balance. That's a nice spot. His fitness is at an all-time high. Notice that his fitness and his fatigue are almost matched. They're identical. So he's maintaining his fitness and his fatigue. He's not growing it, and in fact, he's actually a little bit positive. And last weekend, he was even a little bit positive too. Not quite as much, but just about. And then the weeks before, he was slightly negative, and even more so negative 4 and 5 weeks out. In fact, he was negative 23. So he was putting in all this good volume, and now we've been freshening him up. And finally, we're coming down into the taper. And by the time we get to race day, he's going to be at a +15 to +20 training stress balance, which is what I've been coaching you guys to try and find your athletes be a part of that. So you're going to look at that and say sometimes your athletes are doing a good job and they're knowing, they're committing their data and you can see it really well. Other times you're going to have to play detective and go in there and say, I wonder what the heck their training stress balance actually is. And you may need to check in and say, like, hey, are you doing your workouts? Are you doing your sessions? Because if they do too much 2 weeks out, or they do try and play catch up or something like that, they may, be a little bit tired on race day. I'd almost rather athletes be a little bit more tired, in particular athletes that are inconsistent with their training, those A-level athletes, like the beginner level athletes, than my C-level athletes who need more freshness. Because those guys and girls really need to make sure that they taper and that they absorb all the training that they've done for the previous, 4 to 6, 8 weeks, and their build phases that are pretty intense. So A priority races do take a little more attention, a little bit more of, checking in with your athletes and making sure that they're feeling pretty good. So the TriStar A priority race tapers, as I mentioned, try to bring your athletes into training stress balance to just slightly negative or at 0 the weekend before race day. That's important to understand. You don't want somebody going in with a -20, -30 a week out from their race. That's a major mistake to tapering, because they're never -20, -30. Megan, you're not there.
-15 doesn't sound very good right now.
Perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. -20 to -30 is more sinister.
I noticed next week I'm at +12 going into the race, so that sounds like it's about right.
Exactly. Okay. I'll give you a couple good stories on why some of these numbers ring true. And as I mentioned, you want to carry a lot of fitness into these events. If you're a B level athlete versus a C level athlete versus an A level athlete, these will fluctuate somewhat. I get more concerned on the athletes who are at +25 and beyond, and they've lost fitness. That makes me really anxious, and I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
All right. So common tapering errors: too much intensity or too little intensity, right? If you don't have enough intensity, then your athletes tend to be fairly flat and they don't maximize their thresholds on race day. If they have too much intensity, then they're way fatigued and they're not recovering. Too much volume, your athlete, again, comes into race day too tired. Not enough volume, and they don't have enough specificity to fulfill the distance of what they're trying to do, whether it's swim, bike, run, anything. Not enough recovery. I really like athletes in the final 10 days to check in with themselves and say, 1 day hard, 1 day easy, always moving towards full recovery. That's a really important mantra to take. There's changes to the diet during the tapering phase, but you don't want athletes to get too crazy or too quick with this, because if people are trying to make weight changes or like, oh, I don't want to eat too much, just tell them to eat normal. Don't fuss with this. This is not the time to make changes to your weight. And as long as you eat healthy and fresh, you're going to do just fine in the tapering phase. So dieting is not a good idea during tapering. You can eat clean, but not introduce lots of pulling back on calories. That's a major mistake that athletes make, and then they come into the race with mental gaps, and they're not strong, and they don't think they can do well, and then they suddenly get a big boost of carbs on like 2 days before or the day of. They're exploding with energy, and they gain a little weight, and it's really just a yo-yo. So there's nothing good that comes of that. Extra mega sessions, another mistake of tapering. Is that really training for your mind or your body? Are you putting in this big day? Is it ill-timed? Why are you doing it? And athletes will really question whether or not they can do the distance if they're doing long course stuff. And they're going to be very tempted to go and do one last session, one big overload, and that's for their head. And you need to tell them to cool their head. Other considerations is the quality of rest, the levels of life stress, and travel logistics. All those need to be wrapped into how you're tapering your athlete. Be ready to help your athletes with fine-tuning and adjustments as needed, so you can pull the plug on a session. When in doubt, leave it out. Get these guys to the starting line in one piece. They'll be better. So signs that you're past peak and have tapered too much. So this is a story for you guys. Now I'm going to pull up so you can see my face, so you can see exactly what I'm talking about.
So quick questions on that sort of fine tuning thing.
Yeah.
What about athletes who are, say, like they haven't quite hit the full taper and they're like complaining that they're tired or they're not feeling well? Probably best to take a rest day. So
hear me out. This is the story where the story comes in.
Yep.
The answer is it depends.
So it always depends.
It always depends. So I was working with an athlete. She's an elite level athlete and professional, and she called me. It was about 10 days out and said, "I'm not going to do well at this race. I'm pulling out. This is terrible," and on borderline edge of tears. And I said, well, it's against my better judgment. I really think you're going to be okay. Why don't you call me tomorrow? And if things are bad, we'll deal with it then, and maybe we'll make some changes. So I get the text back, and it says, yeah, I'm really not doing so well, and I'm not feeling so good. In fact, I can't get out of bed, and I'm crying. So I said, fine. Pull the plug. We give her 2 full rest days, rest. And I was watching the numbers, and and 3 days in, I said, "How are you feeling?" Now it's Monday, and it's still like I don't feel so good. I'm not so confident in this race. And then Tuesday, Wednesday came along. Yes, I'm feeling a little better. On Wednesday, all of a sudden, I get this message in this phone call, voicemail. I'm listening to it. I'm going to crush this race. I'm jumping out of my skin. Can't wait to do well. And the race was Sunday. And so in my mind, I knew already the race was blown because we had pumped the brakes, come all the way down, and had almost 6 full days of no training. And now we're doing another 4 or 5 days of soft tapering into an event that was the major race for the whole season. And so that race day, heart rate was high, the metrics were off, and unfortunately she didn't do very well, and she really had a flat day. Now this is an elite concept. This isn't as much for your A level athletes or your B, intermediate level athletes. This is really for the high level folks that are going to need this. And what happened was basically there was too much taper. I got wrapped up into the emotion of what she was telling me. And in fact, what I should have done was be very qualified with the training stress and match that with how she was feeling and still kept her training through it. So it depends on your athletes. It depends on their goals. And oftentimes athletes will complain about feeling lethargic, tired, all sorts of stuff because things are changing. Their body's actually starting to come into form. It's recovering a little bit, and that makes you fatigued too. And so it makes you start to question everything. But these numbers, and the reason why, again, I'll call it the bedrock. It's not the be-all, end-all, but it's the bedrock that makes you have confidence in what you're going to tell your athletes on why they think they should have a good race. And what I should have done in that scenario was said, here's what you should do. Do some more training. Do it light. Keep trying to stick with it. Because on race day, you're going to be really in a good spot. So that's kind of the 411 on watching your athletes taper. Now, I won't say that every athlete's going to give you great information all the time. And sometimes life will get in the way. Stress, not just training stress, but we're talking about, I got to fly to Chicago, or my kids were up all night, or, hey, I don't know, whatever, I'm sick, like whatever. So you got to figure that out. And that's where the beauty of and fun of being a coach comes in. Because if it was all just plug and play, it'd be pretty much said and done. You guys, we'd have much less of a job as coaches. But it's up to us to figure out how to fine tune and massage that stuff. Any questions on that stuff? What do you think?
When you realized the race was blown before it had happened, if that were to happen now, how honest would you be with her going into it?
So this is a really interesting exercise and psychology. My philosophy is not to chime the bell. If you chime the bell, you ruin the race even further. And your confidence for an athlete going into the taper is extremely critical. You can help steer the ship, but you're always steering the ship towards the best eventual outcome. So if you decide to tell them that they're going to have a bad race, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you have to help them stay above that and keep them on the rails no matter what, because even if they have a race that's lackluster, their perception of how they will do, the mind is a very powerful thing, and they can still race very well. But if you tell them they're going to have a bad race, they're going to have a very bad race. And so you got to salvage it the best you can. And in the scenario with this individual, I didn't tell her any of that, even though in my mind I really knew that, unfortunately, that was going to be the outcome. So you live, you learn, and some of this stuff you have to kind of go through it, even as coaches, to figure it out. That's why you learn anecdotally here and try to practice this stuff before you get to it. But you don't become a good coach without having, some missteps along the way.
Sure.
Yep.
Also, don't tell your athlete when they come off the bike that they blew it on the bike and they're going to have a sucky run either. He's very good at that.
Yeah, no, that was when I was in Whole Foods having
apparently you told others, like,
hold on,
she's blown.
I was sitting in Whole Foods and I'm on my phone going, somebody please tell Megan to slow down. And then I knew that my evening was
I got the message.
Yeah, it happened later.
Yeah, it hurt.
That's right. That's exactly right. But you salvaged it. You came out. All right. So other ideas on tapering in terms of signs that you've peaked and you've tapered too much. A higher heart rate on race day, so you've lost some aerobic capacity. Idea of feeling extremely good. Too early. Example, you're jumping out of your skin and you've got your races on Sunday and it's Tuesday. That type of a thing. Let me share my screen with you guys again.
What do you do if that happens? I don't know what that's like, but.
You mean if you're jumping out of your skin that early on?
Yeah. Are you screwed? Or
No. I mean, look. It's that's a little tricky. Rest assured on the numbers, it's going to be fine, because some people have very good energy and they will feel really good that early. They may not even recognize that they're still coming out of their taper. So that's totally fine. Some people feel very lethargic. Other people are just amped all the time. So that's fine.
Yep.
So another sign that you've tapered too much, your flat performance on race day. This can also be seen in the training stress balance. So this is a really important thing. If you guys take away one major coaching anecdote from this session, it's nothing you do the final week of tapering will have any material change on your race performance, and you'll have more to lose than to gain with any of the sessions in that final week. It's for your head, it's for staying sharp, and that's pretty much it. So everything else is just to stay sharp. So that final week, you have to do something, and you don't want to completely do nothing, but less is more, and when in doubt, you really want to leave it out. So what does a good taper look like? 3 to 5 days out, your athlete is really starting to feel rested, fresh, and ready to race. During the taper week, many athletes, as I said, will feel lethargic, and once their body recovers a bit, they may shed some of that lingering fatigue, and that's lasting from 3 to 5 weeks of their build phase. Race day, an athlete, as their energy is going to be on command, really, and they're going to feel really good and fresh and strong. And it's not atypical to see +5 to 8 BPM, beats per minute. And don't worry about this, and prepare your athletes to be ready for that, and they can support it. So don't worry if they say, oh, coach, my heart rate was 145 and you told me to be at 140, and are they going to blow the race? No, they're going to be fine. They'll be totally fine. And that's where you're going to have to help them with perceived effort as well as pacing. So tapering, during the tapering, the athlete feels more of a desire to race, is increased as their level of excitement and anxiety increases. That's normal too. We want those good butterflies. What to do if your athlete misses a key session and or substantial amount of training during the final 3 weeks. This is where you have to go in and do a little bit of brain surgery, and you have to figure out if your athlete is aerobically limited. You may have to give them a long, very easy session, but you're going to have to go in and look into that training stress balance. You're going to have to look in their performance management chart and see if they can support it. So you can't, for instance, have somebody do like a 5 or 6 hour bike ride or super long run the weekend before a race because it'll make them too tired, but maybe they can get away with something half that distance. And that would be only unless you're really worried, like 2 weeks out for some reason they had some sort of life event, they couldn't do something. And those athletes who have a lot of history, or I call them let's say the B-level athletes to C-level athletes, the more advanced folks, they may not need that. They'll be fine with their taper. It won't be ideal, but it'll be better than them trying to do something more the weekend before that's long and or hard. The aerobic base is always something that we keep in place. Easy, long distance training is always beneficial as long as it's within reason of the athlete's history. So in that final week, let's see, anything else? Nope, that's good. Any questions, guys, on that stuff? I'm going to turn this screen share off so you can ask some questions. Pretty cool subject, and I think that, before we had the tools that we had today, early on, a lot of the tapers for myself, for athletes I worked with, were hit or miss, experimental. Sometimes you went into a race tired. Sometimes you went into a race way too tapered. Sometimes you got it just right and the stars aligned. But nowadays, I feel way more confident with any athlete that goes into a race that, of what the outcome is going to be. Because of what their fitness is, because of the data, it really supports everything you're doing. And so if you look back and you can see, well, the athlete hit all the training stress for the long bikes, all the key sessions for the runs, and the IF was there for what we want to hold on race day, and they did it multiple times in their training. Great. They're solid. If they've been missing some sessions and missing some weeks, you may need to pull back on their pacing plan and give them a little bit easier pacing plan, for instance. That often may happen. Probably that's more regular than not. Or you may find athletes, for whatever reason, can't fulfill the intensity that you're asking them to. So maybe they only were able to get in their longest bike ride was 75% of their FTP. And you're asking them on race day to go to 76, 77 for a half Ironman. And so then you'd have to calibrate. You'd have to go off of what their longest ride is. And we'll talk more about that kind of pacing approach in the future. But these are the kind of gaps that you need to fill in as a coach and say, how fit are they? How consistent have they been? What is their training stress balance? And how do I, get them to the fastest and best of their peak form, whether it's an A, B, or C priority race. So we still got some time before you guys, next season have athletes racing for their A priority events, and we'll talk about it more, but it's a great subject, so cool one.
Yeah. What if an athlete is totally hypothetical question. Sorry, it's very timely subject, Kyle. I'm not trying to hog the mic here. What if an athlete has taper sharpening sessions that it's me, that I can see are good, that are good sessions, right? I want to get them in, but you put them on the day that I fly from 6 a.m. till 6 p.m. Pretty unlikely I'm not gonna ride my bike outside when I get there because that's dark and that's dumb. So is it okay to the next day is a total rest day? Is it okay to use that travel day as a rest day and get those? They're short, sharp sessions. Get those done first thing in the morning and then rest the rest of the day.
Yeah, short and sharp in the morning is good. Travel days typically should be reserved as almost total rest days because stress of travel is a lot.
Yeah.
Flying and just being in the tin can for that long, and air pressure changes, temperature changes, the fact that you can get sick, sleep, all that stuff kind of factors in. But less is more, like I said. you can train pretty darn good up until Tuesday and Wednesday, and after that, it's really more for your head, as I mentioned.
Yeah, I was just looking at, I have like a 45-minute bike, a 10-minute run off the bike, and a 30-minute swim on Wednesday. That's my travel day. And then Thursday's marked as a whole rest day. And I'm like, can I switch those 2 days? Because that'd be perfect. You know, I can get up Thursday morning, test the bike out, and then be done by like 9 a.m., you know.
Yeah.
And
let me pull it up.
And then, you know, I have really easy shorties on Friday, and then really easy shorties on Saturday.
So you're talking about.
So is it okay? Is it okay to put the rest day on the Wednesday because that's my flight day?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool. I can just move those. I just wondered, and it seemed relevant to what you were just talking about, so which is why I decided to ask you here and not on our coaching call.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah.
Generally speaking, Megan, I really like to have one good solid rest day in the week of a taper. Even if you're sharpening up, one full hard stop rest day where you do nothing but rest. So, because you're always.
Well, Wednesday's my flight, so if that's good, that'll be good. Because I like leave really, really stupid early, and then, but if that's not enough, you know, I can.
Nope,
I like all those little short sharpening sessions. As much as I get up and I'm like, oh, I don't know, it seems ridiculous to get all this gear together for 20 minutes. But then I'm usually always happy that I did that.
Yeah.
So I'm sure Kyle can relate to that.
I do everything inside, so it's a little different.
I have to say,
I do a lot inside up here too, but I definitely don't, except for swimming. And then, but I don't like when I get to the race site because I usually like to do all those little things somewhere, even if it's not the whole course, like somewhere on the course, so like something looks familiar when I'm out there. So, plus I'm gonna be in Cozumel, dude. I'm gonna swim with fishes as much as possible, and water that's not 50 degrees.
I've been testing out the Wahoo Kicker Core.
Oh yeah, how is that?
Yeah, it's great, and the climb too. So I've been Zwifting a bunch and creating some new workouts for the libraries, and pretty solid, both of them. Great units, really great units. So pretty pleased with it. What I found was kind of nice about the climb is that you can just raise the front up and down anytime you want. You can just leave it if you want. And that's kind of nice too if you're riding inside just to get the pitch right, because oftentimes when you're riding in the TT position in the aero bars, right, you're actually down a bit, and sometimes you put it in a climbing block, it's too high or it's just flat, but you can micro adjust it, which is kind of neat too. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I do not need new gear. I do not need new gear.